So the question is, once again, I come back to the thing is, what changed in the 1970s? Everything seemed to be going fine in the 50s and 60s. What happened in the 1970s? So in the 1970s, inflation was high. Now, as long as inflation was low, let's take a look here. As long as inflation was low, we were effectively at a point where theta was 0, because previous year's inflation, the pi t minus 1, was a very low figure. So making an expectation on next year's or this year's inflation could be done without taking a look at what had happened before. But once inflation started to become very high, we could no longer ignore previous year's inflation. Okay, and as a result, we had to start looking back, and that gave rise to something called the modified Phillips curve. And the way of deriving this is quite straightforward. We take this pi t is equal to, we have already derived this, remember, m plus z minus alpha ut. This is the original Phillips curve. And from here, what we are going to do is we are going to replace this with, right here, with this equation. So this value, we're going to plug it in here. And as a result, what we are going to get is 1 minus theta plus theta pi t minus 1 plus m plus z minus alpha u t. This is known as the modified, or okay, let me write down all the terms. This is known either as modified or expectation augmented, or an accelerationist Phillips curve. So these are the three terms that are used. We're going to stick to calling it a modified Phillips curve because it's the easiest. But that's with the terms. Let's look at what does this tell us. We have derived this. What does this equation tell us? So let me write down this. Between 1970 and 2014, in the US, this is what we had. Okay, before I do that, I'll have to do a bit of modification. I'm sorry, I got carried away. Okay. Let's bring this down here. And if theta is 1, which is applicable when inflation is high, if theta is 1, what do we get? We get pi t equals to, excuse me, we get pi t minus 1 plus m plus z minus. And if we rearrange this a little bit, what we see is that pi t minus pi t1, which is basically this year's inflation minus the previous year's inflation. So the difference between that is equal to m plus z minus lambda ut. Now, in the US, between 1970 and 2014, this equation looked something like this. The difference between any two consecutive years inflation could be given by this 3% minus 0.5 ut. Okay. So effectively, what do we have? M plus z, which is the fixed part of inflation, change in inflation was 3%, and lambda was 0.5. Okay. What this meant was that if we had zero unemployment, this part became zero. Then the difference between the 2 years inflation is usually 3%. But of course, unemployment rate would fluctuate as well. It would go up and down, and that would affect the, what do you call it, the inflation rate. So this is the modern version of the Phillips curve. Not this is just an example. This is the modern version of the Phillips curve, the modified Phillips curve. And what this tells us, the traditional Phillips curve told us that there was a relationship between unemployment and inflation. What the modified Phillips curve tells us is that there is a relationship between, let me write this down. There is a trade-off between change in inflation and unemployment. So basically, what the modified Phillips curve tells us is, depending on by how much the unemployment rate is in the economy, we will be able to figure out by how much the inflation will change. So if unemployment, let me break this down again. If unemployment went up, the traditional Phillips curve was telling us that the inflation rate will go down and vice versa. What the modified Phillips curve tells us is that if unemployment rate goes up, the change between the 2 years inflation, the change is going to go down. Okay, this is a subtle difference between the two, but it's a very important difference. So it may take a while to understand. So what I am going to do is, I'm not going to go any further. We haven't covered a lot of things for one day's lecture. We usually cover a lot more, but I'm going to leave it here for lecture 11, because there is a lot of new thing to understand, and more importantly, a lot of new things to conceptually understand. So instead of spending too much time just looking at a lot of videos, what I would recommend is, you guys, after having seen this I think 3 videos, go to the book, read the book as soon as you can, and then come back to the videos and look at the videos and see if it makes sense. All right, so it's important because, well, I keep saying this all the time, but going forward, understanding of this is going to be important, especially in the very next lecture. So I hope you all will revise.